I think one of the things that prevents men from asking women out or proposing to them is that we want to keep our options open, you know? I remember I called my mate Mark Bennett in Brisbane. I'd moved to Texas where my wife, well, now wife, was living. I had bought a wedding ring, but I was still not sure. And I gave him a call. And I said, Mark, I'm just not sure, mate. And he actually said, what the hell are you talking about, mate? She's better than you anyway. You should ask her out before she figures that out. No joke. I proposed to her that night. But what would your advice be to a man who's discerning but too much?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing is that freedom exists for the sake of love. It exists to be given away. And the alternative, I mean, men have really bought a false notion of freedom that if I give myself, I'm losing myself. If I commit, what if someone better comes along? If I get a girlfriend, I'm tied down. If I get married, it's ball and chain. If I have kids, it's game over. This is all a very broken idea of freedom. The church says that man will only find himself in the fullest giving of himself. And at the end of the day, you got to roll the dice at some point. You got to cast it. You got to put all the chips in. And it's going to be, an investment of sorts, and it's going to be a gamble of sorts, but it's a leap of faith because there will always be someone else that comes along later on that might seem more attractive or more alluring. And yeah, it's bound to happen, but that's why marriage isn't a feeling. It's a choice. Like I've chosen this, and even though it can feel like a crucifixion at times, and there might be seem like easier options that are out there, until further notice, Christ is telling me to stay on the cross. And so, yeah, you can't do this paralysis by analysis. A lot of guys do this not only with girls but with seminary, meaning, they're like discerning themselves into oblivion of just like, is this an apple seed or is it an orange seed? Is it an apple or orange? It could be an apple, but it does. Dude, put the stupid thing in the ground and see what grows up.
Yeah.
Meaning go to the seminary, ask her out.
Yes.
The most overlooked aspect of discernment is action.
Yes.
And that's what's missing. They want to think it out and get it all figured out when sometimes you just need to go and you need to ask her out, take her on a date, get to know her, see how it works out. And sometimes I remember hearing one guy, he asked a girl out and she's like, no, I'm really not interested in you as more than a friend. Okay. And he waited a year and he asked her out again. And she's like, no, remember, I just see you as a friend.
Ago.
Okay. And so he waits a year and he asks her out again. And by then she'd gotten to know him better. And she's like, okay, we'll go out. She fell madly in love with the guy. They got married and they have a family together. Oh. Now, usually that's not the way that things pan out, but it's a fact that like you got to ask, you got to try, you got to initiate, because just because you ask a girl out on a date doesn't mean you're dating. This is something that paralyzes a lot of guys at Catholic campuses.
Yeah, that's good.
If you're like in a Newman Center at a Catholic college where everybody knows everybody, or Steubenville, Ave Maria, or whatever, it's like, well, if I ask her out, everybody's going to think we're dating because we just went on a date.
That's interesting. Yeah,
no, there's a distinction. Just as you have to clearly ask her on a date, you have to clearly ask her to date, meaning boyfriend, girlfriend. So just because you took her out for a milkshake in a movie or whatever doesn't mean that you're her boyfriend. And so the culture used to be like that, where I remember meeting one grandma, and she told me that her grandma told her never go on a date with the same guy 2 Saturdays in a row, because that might make him think that you actually are interested in him. And so, but back then, the availability was like that. Right. I mean, women would have dates every weekend. They'd go dancing with guys. It's just the culture. I mean, I know one grandma, she got 10 marriage proposals in 5 years.
Wow.
In the 1940s.
Oh, man.
It's the way it was. And I kind of start the book with this because my grandpa was like part of the greatest generation. This is a guy at the age of 20 was flying an airplane in World War II into thunderstorms deliberately at nighttime to avoid Japanese aircraft. He was flying once 300 miles behind enemy territory in Burma, delivering a cargo load of barbed wire to an encampment. And while he's flying, the engine dies. And the plane starts plummeting down towards a place where there's, Japanese troops that if they were to land, they'd be slaughtered immediately. They kept no prisoners. And so they start unloading all the barbed wire, throwing it out of the back of the plane to try to lighten the cargo load, as the altitude is sinking. And this whole thing's plummeting. And he starts praying, and the engine turns back on. He pulls it out, and they are able to get out of here. And he lands, and he gets home. And and he's doing this at the same age that I was playing ultimate frisbee in college. And so imagine when these men, and I'm talking, how many of these guys came back? 16 million of them were in World War II.
Yeah.
And they came back knowing asking a girl out is not a risk.
Yeah.
Getting shot down by the Japanese over Burma is a risk. And so they came home knowing what matters. I want to ask out my high school sweetheart.
Yes.
We're going to have a family. I'm going to start a
Yes.
business. I'm going to be,
Yes.
and they just boomed. I mean, the productivity of that generation was huge. I think because they were put into this furnace of suffering to like and they saw their friends lose their lives and they came home with such a purpose and mission
clarity.
that is utterly lacking in today's millennials in this generation because we haven't been forced to grow up that fast. But I think we need to kind of return to that intentionality of like my manhood was given to me as a gift, to make a gift of myself to another.
Well, I'm so glad I got married. I was 22 years old, I think, and I'm really glad. I mean, I know we don't all have that opportunity, but I'm really glad I did that because it enabled us to kind of grow up together and mature together. And maybe I want to ask you, though, should teens be dating anyway? Which might sound like a provocative question, but I was asked this recently when I was speaking at a Steubenville conference, like some advice for teens dating. My honest advice was, I don't think you should be dating because I know what they mean by date. Like, unless you're a teen who's in a place where you can be married, so like you're 19 or something.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, I don't think it's a good idea. Yeah. What's your thought, though?
And so I would distinguish teen versus high school. Because teen, you could be speaking of a 19-year-old,
right? Yes,
college,
exactly.
marriage. So when we're talking about high school kids, the happiest high school students I've met in the world were students who told me they saw no point whatsoever in dating in high school. Because for a couple of reasons. One, the emotional maturity level at that point. Like if a girl might feel emotionally mature enough to date, well, she's surrounded by a bunch of high school guys that probably go home, play video games, look at some porn, and come back to school the next day. I met a high school boy once, and he told me he goes home on Saturday, he watches 12 hours of pornography, goes to bed, wakes up on Sunday, watches 12 hours of pornography, and goes back to school on Monday. He said, I don't even enjoy it anymore. It disgusts me, but I don't know how to live without it. Now imagine he asks out your daughter the next week. He would destroy someone in that relationship. And I'm not saying that every high school boy is some porn-addicted, walking hormone, but the maturity level, spiritually, emotionally, what happens when a girl dates most high school guys, you don't want to hang your coat on a hook that can't bear the weight. And oftentimes a girl gives their heart to the guy, and then he just drops it on the floor, and she's like, well, what's wrong with me? But she wasn't really the problem. The fact is that dating exists to find a spouse. It's marital discernment. In a sense, it's a job interview. And if you don't know what you're looking for in a candidate, you don't have the guts to say no, you could end up making some really poor hiring decisions. And so let's say a girl in high school meets a good guy, and hey, they can make an awesome couple. Great. And they start dating. Then graduation hits. Oh, great. He's going to UCLA next year.
Yeah.
And I'm going to Ave Maria. And now we're going to have some long distance 4-year relationship while he's meeting 30,000 college girls and she's meeting 50,000 college guys. And she gets a job in Houston and he lands a job in Atlanta. It's like, what's the point? There really isn't one. And so a lot of times I find high school kids get blindsided by graduation. Like they didn't even know it was coming. And then it hits and it's like, oh, wait a minute. You're going to live 2,000 miles away for the next several years, and you don't want to pick your college based on where she's going. That's not the right discernment with college. And so it just creates such a difficult dynamic. And what I tell them is, look, long-term, long-distance relationships are pretty hard to work out.
Very.
Long-term, long-distance friendships usually stand the test of time. And so if you really want this thing to go the distance,
that's a really good point.
Focus on the foundation of friendship. Like the biggest...
That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean...
You don't hear people say, like, how do I maintain a long-term friendship?
No,
if you're friends, you probably will be.
Yeah, and I think of like the biggest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa over in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I've been there.
Under it is hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete. And to me, that's like the friendship foundation under a relationship. And so if you're not dating, you're not just like waiting until you can be in a relationship. You're pouring the foundation that needs to be underneath the structure of love. Whereas when you just take off immediately into romance, you often miss that foundation. That's why many of the girls, when I did the dating interviews, were like how important it was for them to be friends with a guy before the relationship begins. So I recommend to the guys, hey, and the girls, like just focus on the season of friendship. Because then you really get to know this person. Like, who really are they?
Yeah.
Like, how does this guy...
And if we're friends and there's no romantic kind of, intention, I get to actually see who you are. It was like with my wife. My wife and I were serving as missionaries, and neither of us had plans on dating each other one day, so I actually got to see who she was. She wasn't trying to put on a good face for me. Yeah,
and so you get to know, like, how does this guy treat girls he's not attracted to? Does this guy share my morality or just kind of respect my morality? And what about the girl? Like, is it just basically what she looks like? What if every girl looked just like she does? What would draw me to her?
Yeah.
Does she bring out the best in me?
Would she be a good mother?
Yeah. I mean, I heard one priest, he said, look, if you marry a woman of virtue, you're going to have a happy life. But he said, if you marry a woman, no matter how gorgeous she is, if she does not have virtue, you will have a miserable life.
Yes.
And so that's the season of friendship. You don't get fogged over in your judgment as easily when you're just focusing on the friendship first.
Hey, if you enjoyed that clip, you will absolutely love the full interview, so click right there to enjoy the whole thing. Also, a big thanks to these groups who made that interview possible. Learn more in the show notes below about these guys. They're absolutely incredible and honored to have them as sponsors. Oh, and also, if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe and then that bell button. That way YouTube will be forced to let you know when we put out more content.